Murat Tesh kindly join us. Busy couple days for Murat because, of course, yesterday, Kevin Cheveldayoff sat down with the traveling media, of course, of which The Athletic is a part of, thankfully. First of all, fill us in on where did you guys meet? What was the format? I'm interested to kind of get a bit of a picture of how this went down.
Yeah, so it was at the Jets Hotel, which is, a few budget classes above what I stay in. So I made a walk through downtown Denver and met Gregor Brewer of Jets PR staff there. Mike showed up and he took us up to sort of a conference room. So if you can imagine one of those hotel type conference rooms with a bunch of round tables everywhere with tablecloths and all that sort of stuff, we were the only ones in the room. It was Chevy, Mike, myself, Gregor, and then also Mitchell Clinton sort of sat in, though it wasn't he wasn't asking questions, and I don't believe he wrote off of the results. I don't think he took recordings or anything like that. But that was the five of us, I guess, sitting at one of those round tables. And plus, I know Chevy has a reputation for being just circle speak and doesn't say much, especially when at the podium at Matt Frost. And so as much as I feel for folks who weren't able to have the access to be there, Chevy in a small group situation with Mike and I asking questions, opportunity for clarification, little back and forth, some jokes. It was absolutely a wonderful conversation, even when it got challenging. And the three of us saw each other in the hall just about 10 minutes ago and all agreed, wasn't that a great way to do it? And Chevy felt the same way we did. So it was an ideal version of a Cheveldayoff interview from my point of view.
Well, you know what? That is awesome. And listen, I understand why they did it. And I will just say this to me, not as Winnipeg sports talk, but just as someone that wants as much information on this team as possible. There's a reason why I will always subscribe to The Athletic and the Winnipeg Free Press, because in today's climate, it is not easy to have people on the road. And, we are very fortunate to have an independent paper and obviously yourself with The Athletic doing what you're doing and being boots on the ground in places like this for this. So important to support our journalism if you want to keep this sort of stuff continuing and moving forward. So let's get to some of the topics that you covered. First off, what was the question about Jonathan Toews, and how did Chevy kind of describe their interest and the possibilities based on what he's hearing of Toews even coming back?
Yeah, as I remember it, Mike was the first one to bring him up, and the question was just would the Winnipeg Jets be interested in Jonathan Toews? And Chevy said, well, he's an unrestricted free agent, so we can talk about him, right? He's not somebody else's player right now. And he took a really warm tone to the idea. He said it would be a great fit. He said the Jets would love to have that conversation. He said that he's been in touch with Toews representatives. Said it had been a little while since that they'd last spoke, but that this is an ongoing bit of communication that they're having. And he would love it as a chapter of Jonathan Toews' career as well. Not that Toews needs another championship or something to that effect, but Cheveldayoff's perspective was the homecoming could be a really sweet story. And I mean, he also took a moment to clarify, right? Some of this is far away blue sky thinking. Toews is seeking to make his NHL return, but he's coming from a long way back. A lot of health issues. He turns 37 this spring. The fact that he's trying clearly means he's on a good path, but he's really going to have to push his body, Cheveldayoff said, and then see how it responds. Can it handle the rigors of NHL-type practices and all that sort of stuff? So Toews' return seems likely-ish, but it's also more of an if thing than an absolutely when thing, if that makes sense. But I did ask, okay, so if that takes a little while and it's September and now he's making his return, are the Winnipeg Jets interested? And he didn't shy away from that either. I think this is a player that he would really like to have on board the Jets.
They've got a prior relationship, and I mean, listen, if you can get Jonathan Toews, with what he brings to the package on the ice, off the ice, the leadership, the experience as well for a team that, frankly could use some experience with positive results in the playoffs, it does seem like it would be a no-brainer for the Jets to be involved in, discussing. And he did mention that the story itself not that that would be the reason for him coming back, does almost right itself, Murat.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of Winnipeg born and bred elite NHL athletes who could probably handle the scrutiny of playing in the hometown, right? Like it's not necessarily as easy as it might sound, right? I don't think Cody Eakin came in and blew the doors off or had the best experience here in Winnipeg when the Jets acquired him, as an example. But I think that Jonathan Toews is built a little bit differently than that. Certainly, when he's playing and at his peak, he was a much higher caliber of player. He's also won just about everything under the sun: World Juniors, 2 Olympic golds, 3 Stanley Cups, a Conn Smythe, a Selke Trophy, a Mark Messier Leadership Award, and the cup that they won together in 2010, I know is marred for some people by the Kyle Beach incident and the Blackhawks' inability to properly protect Kyle Beach in that situation. I don't think that that's necessarily a factor playing into any of the conversations Cheveldayoff and Toews representatives are having. I think that the view on all of those guys' part is that it would just be a real sweet homecoming, and that if Toews is playing, it means that Toews has found a level of on-ice ability that satisfies somebody as driven as he is.
Yeah, that is key. Like I've talked to some people that have a connection with Jonathan, and I mean, this is not a guy that just wants to come back for the sake of coming back and playing a little bit more and saying, well, I didn't end my career the way I did before. I mean, the goal would be to come back and be Jonathan Toews and be able to help teams win hockey games and potentially do something special. So that's one little possibility, a unique possibility that is out there, far from a sure thing. Even if he's going to make a comeback, whether that's this year or in the future. So let's talk about the short term right now, the trade deadline. And I laughed when I was reading your article in The Athletic in the takeaways that he may hate the term, but he is all in this season. It is something that fans and media use all the time. Well, this team is all in. I think that they would say that they're all in from day one of the regular season each and every year. But the fact of the matter is this is a first-place hockey club with some clear needs to truly take it to a spot that I think that they can truly flourish and be a tough out for anybody in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
I think that's legitimate. And I'll make Chevy's argument for him a little bit here. It's purely semantic to me, but for him, it would be about all the time he spends on trying to build the Winnipeg Jets out to be a winner. And his point about hating the term all in is that for him, all in isn't just the moments where you go out and acquire players at the trade deadline or otherwise. It's not just that splash moment. His point is that there are a lot of hard decisions that happen throughout the season, in the off season. And sometimes they're about letting players go. Sometimes it's about which amount of money do you give which player. They could have signed Cole Perfetti long-term to more money if that was their interest, but they didn't. And now they have more cap space as a result. Is that going to hurt them later the way that Velarde is about to get an enormous raise? All of these decisions for him are part of what make a team all in. He says every difficult decision constitutes that. Okay, well, I think we understand that. And the Winnipeg Jets are in first place in the Western Conference. Every time that they've had a team of this quality or caliber, they've put chips in the table. They acquired Paul Stastny in 2018, Kevin Hayes in 2019, Monahan, Toffoli, Miller last year. Those are the 3 best Jets teams other than this one in 2.0 history, and they added every single time. Not only that, but they arrive at this moment, and there's going to be some foibles cap-wise because Lowry's injury may mean that there's another player called up, and there's going to be items there. But they project to get to deadline day able to add $11 million worth of contracts. That could be a top 6 forward and a top 4 defenseman, depending on what's happening. And so Chevy himself yesterday said there's opportunity cost that comes with that cap space now. Do you make one move? Do you make 2 moves? Do you go small here and big there? And when he's putting those ideas front of mind, and when that's the discussion that he's having with us, it's definitely the one he's having with his management team, with Larry Simmons, with all the pro scouts. They're taking a good long look at how they can make the Winnipeg Jets better. And I have no reason to think that they won't use all 11 million or close in their efforts to do so.
One of the things that is, in addition just to losing Adam Lowry, your captain, and how important he is, one of the things that really sucks about the timing of this is that we were starting to get a bigger body of work for Lowry, Ehlers, and Iafallo together, assuming that the top line stays with Gabe playing up with 55 and 81. And I was intrigued in that. And again, maybe this all goes back to that brilliant performance against Colorado. But if all of a sudden you can have a shutdown line that includes a Nikolai Ehlers that's adding a little bit more offense, what does that do to your need at, quote, 2C? Or, can you maybe get a tweener, sort of a middle six guy that could come in, boost the depth of the center position, but give you more assets to potentially use for the blue line? And unfortunately, based on what we've learned today, they're probably not going to know that. But did you gather anything about the true targets, about where in the lineup that Cheveldayoff would be looking for? And has anything changed based on the season that Adam Lowry's had and what they've seen as of late?
Yeah, great question. And I did ask about exactly that. Exactly. Like, do you see the same holes that I see? And I listed that second line and the idea of a center or a player that can make that an impactful line. And as well as I mentioned, sort of help on top four defense. And Cheveldayoff didn't necessarily shoot down those ideas, but what he said was that, yes, that's a good question, but maybe a better question is, what can the market provide that actually fills those holes? What do the actual plugs look like that are available for those holes, whatever they may be? And I think his point is this. We can look around and say that the Jets, even with Adam Lowry, let's say that they go back to the Appleton and Niederreiter version of the Lowry line. Even in that situation, you need an upgrade, I think, at second line center. They certainly felt that way in acquiring Sean Monahan last year, and I feel that way again now. That wrinkle you're talking about with the Ehlers line, that gives them options. I was hesitant to believe they'd keep it heading into playoffs, but we'll see. But there seems to be a hole there. But does the market provide the answer to that? Because I can talk about Brock Nelson and his 16-team no-trade list. There's a chance, I think it's 16, there's a chance that on Long Island, if he gets asked to waive and there's a deal consummated, he might not. There's also a chance he's not even as much on the market as all the trade boards would lead you to believe. And that was Cheveldayoff's point too, is that right here and now, we can point to these holes, and he's not denying that they exist. He's not, every roster has its flaws or its opportunities for improvement. But the conversations he says he's having right now are at 30,000 feet, planting seeds. Teams will decide between now and probably Four Nations and after Four Nations, are they going to make the playoffs? Are they going to be sellers? Can they keep their own rentals, like Nikolai Ehlers might be for Winnipeg? Can they make other moves? And a lot of that clarity isn't there yet. So I think, and Cheveldayoff spoke to us probably knowing the Adam Lowry situation, despite not providing an injury update. So I think, I don't think that anything he said to us yesterday necessarily changes. I think a middle six type center, I think help on defense, ideally with some physicality, those to me sound like and continue to make sense as sensible additions for the Jets.
Well, and you know what, it's funny you mentioned the blue line and the physicality. I mean, certainly the blue line, while performing, I think, beyond most people's expectations for the most part this year, certainly has room for improvement. But before we even talk about those holes, I did chuckle that there was so much talk about Logan Stanley in this conversation with Chevy, because it kind of resembles what a lot of the social media posts and what the chat is like on a daily basis. Fill us in just on the chat surrounding one of the more polarizing players on the hockey club and the big guy.
Yeah, I think Mike brought it up first and sort of tiptoed into the idea that, like, this is a player that we can't help but ask about, because our day-to-day life involves so many questions and criticisms and concerns and support, but lately more criticism for sure about Logan Stanley. And he is a polarizing player, and he is somebody who all the debates are there. So we're here to be the voice of the fans. I said that, and like, sort of take that, translate it to a conversation with the general manager and see what he has to say about it. I think Cheveldayoff at first wondered is this more of a social media thing? I think he asked, like he referenced Twitter and to that effect. But we clarified that, like, no, it's well beyond that. It's in the comment section at The Athletic. It's in the chat, on Winnipeg Sports Talk. I have a two-part mailbag where the second part is going up on Friday of this week, and the number one question with a bullet by a mile, Logan Stanley, right? Like this is
and Murat,
a issue.
just to quickly mention too, and something that I can't remember ever happening before, but it happened in the building. I mean, the 6-0 game where there was that turnover and the guy went in and scored on Connor Hellebuck. Like, I was in the upper bowl of that game, and I have never, ever heard the amount of vitriol in a game where the team was beating the daylights out of the other squad about a player that happened that time. I mean, there were some, and it wasn't a lot, but there were some, it was literally chanting his name like you would the opposition goaltender to get on him. And like, I kind of, we talked about it on the show. I mean, it was a little unnerving, I think, and I think kind of a below most Winnipeg fans. But the bottom line is, it's not just, now maybe a lot of it kind of starts and that's where the gas is poured on. But the bottom line was, I mean, we were sitting in a game where the Jets win 6-1, and you go into the concourse afterwards, and half the crowd is bitching about a play made by a guy that has become a real lightning rod, if you will.
100%. And I think that, so Mike did mention that, I should say too, as a follow-up to this social media comment, is that it happened in the building. Jets fans in the building. And I think that maybe that's what opened things up a little bit more, because we did speak at absolute length about it. I think Mike's first question was, once we landed on the topic, was about, has he ever told Scott Arniel that this is a guy that you need to play? No, he unequivocally said, no, that's not his job. And one of the things that, I made a point of asking, we had to sort of circle back to this, was the general manager has a role in player usage, and it's not the same as the head coach's role. And I mean, I guess Logan Stanley critics will be happy to know that, I did the listing. I did the first round trade. I did the, Declan Chisholm, the Jonathan Kovacevic, the Dylan DeMello, Mason Appleton exposure to the Seattle expansion draft, and mentioned all of those things, sort of saying that, like, hey, you have a role in this too. And Cheveldayoff then spoke for over a minute. It was impassioned. I think I have almost the entire quote in my story today at The Athletic. Like, it was in defense of Stanley while acknowledging Stanley's flaws. And also he got into sort of development and timelines and how some players can stall and all sorts of things. So I really, really recommend people read the quote in its entirety with some context at the piece. But, like, you're right. We spoke about this player at length. That is, we were talked to Chevy for over an hour, and maybe Stanley was 10 minutes of that.
It was interesting, and everyone's forgot about the COVID season and, playing within the Canadian division and all of that. But he did reference Stanley's role throughout the playoffs at that time, especially in that sweep of the Edmonton Oilers.
Yeah, I bristle at that. I absolutely, positively bristle at that. The reason that I do is because this isn't hindsight thinking. It was during that season I was asked about Logan Stanley's ceiling as an NHL defenseman. And at that point, he was 23 years old, a little bit on the upswing. He'd had a good training camp. He was moving the puck well. And I did the deep dive. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of research on this stuff based on what age a player makes his NHL transition, the type of points he's produced at various levels, the league that he's come from, all that sort of stuff. It's all there. There's a lot of good analytical work on it. You can combine that with the fact that I then looked in this Canadian division with Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews and Brady Tkachuk in it. Who did Logan Stanley play against? And I break it all down in this piece written during that season where Stanley is meant to have excelled in the playoffs and have been on the upswing as a prospect. And to the Jets coaching staff's credit, which is just a smart thing to do with a 23-year-old developing defenseman, it yielded good results. They kept him so far from elite competition. I break down in the mailbag piece from 3 years ago, I think it was, all of the people he played substantial minutes again, and there's not a sniff of a top 6 player on it. So to sell a Hellebuckian excellence sweep against the Edmonton Oilers as Stanley playing a substantial role in that is a stretch to me. I know he scored goals in what I would like to think of as garbage time to delay the sweep against the Montreal Canadiens, but I also think that hanging your hat on that, I don't know. It doesn't work for me. I think Cheveldayoff's point may have been that, look, based on what we knew at that time, it was worth holding on to this player. There was development ahead of him, and we had seen good results. If that's his point, that let's make space for that. I just think that even at the time, those contributions were oversold and are oversold in hindsight.
I know a lot of the talk was about Stanley, but it's tough to talk about Stanley without the other defensemen in the mix, and in particularly Ville Heinola. Did you have any takeaways about Ville in that same conversation about, that kind of sixth spot on the blue line?
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll remember that Stanley season, the All-Canadian division, Ville Heinola went a month without playing in the AHL or NHL. He was stuck on the taxi squad. Like, it's been a developmental issue there. But the things that I think people would be curious about on Ville Heinola, it's not like we had a deep dive conversation about him. But when talking about Stanley, Cheveldayoff also referenced, well, sometimes guys get hurt. And this did happen to Logan Stanley consecutive seasons, right, where he missed some time due to foot injuries. That sets development back. And he said, well, also look at what's happened to Ville Heinola for the last 2 seasons. The ankle injury and then the infection that then exacerbated it. Consecutive training camps he missed, right, and missed substantial time. So he pointed to Heinola as an example of we need to be patient with these guys, everybody, especially when they've gone through stuff like that. And the thing that he said, maybe for the first time, and again, full quote, full context, full everything in the story, but he acknowledged that, you know what, we had to make some tough opportunity cost decisions. After that year where Stanley made his emergence and Heinola went a month without playing, well, the Jets' takeaway was we need to upgrade our defense urgently. And they also were talking about their culture at the time. So in comes Brendan Dillon, in comes Nate Schmidt. Well, that pushes guys down. And that's part of why Ville Heinola hasn't got the opportunity that he has. It's not the whole story, but it is part of that. And I don't think Heinola's knocking it out of the park right here and right now either. But at 23 years old, a moment ago, I said it made sense to have patience with Logan Stanley at that age. Makes a ton of sense to have patience with Ville Heinola here and now at this age as well.
Based on that, with what they have right now, the talk about those young players and the goals for this team, what do you think they are looking for right now, and how aggressive will they be in particular on the Jet blue line before the 7th of March?
Yeah. Now, it's possible that I've read this situation wrong, and it's not all about Logan Stanley's physicality, and there's some other elements to the game, like because they play him as a third pairing defenseman and a second unit PK player. It may be that they believe his size is going to help them win playoff battles, or to things that are not necessarily about the pure physicality. But I think in terms of trade deadline additions, you're probably looking at a defenseman who can play either higher up the lineup than Stanley is, or with more experience that will play his third pairing job better than he does in an all-around capacity, defensively and in transition, while also bringing that physical element. And, a guy that they've been interested in before, a guy I believe they're interested in now, a guy who's completely resuscitated his career, and I think makes sense to talk about, despite some lows in Buffalo once upon a time, is Rasmus Ristolainen. He's resuscitated his career in Philadelphia. I talk to people out there from time to time that have me convinced that he's been a completely adequate number 5D for them, sometimes a number 4, who can play a much smarter, less hit-chasing game than he used to do when his defensive numbers were horrible. And so that's the type of player that I'm thinking about, whether it ends up being Ristolainen or otherwise, that could help push Stanley out of the starting playoff 6, while not necessarily giving up on the physicality element that the Jets seem to be prioritizing.
Gang, you got to get to The Athletic. I mean, it is a long read, but it is a great one. It goes into so many elements of the conversation and the big picture of the Winnipeg Jets. The one other thing, Murat, I wanted to quickly ask you about is that while we all focus on this game tonight against the Avalanche and the trade deadline on the March 7th and what's going to happen in the playoffs, the general manager's job is much more than just what is happening in the here and now. Big decisions to come when it comes to RFAs, UFAs, and a certain guy that's on a 45, 50 goal pace that is going to have one more year in his contract. I mean, if you can, just give us a little bit about the what you asked and what you heard from him on Ehlers' future, Neil Pionk's future, some of the RFAs, and then, of course, Kyle Connor the following year.
Yeah, the short of it is, despite probably having enough cap space this year to make it happen with the cap increasing, Kevin Cheveldayoff doesn't foresee being able to sign all of Winnipeg's unrestricted free agents. He was pretty clear about that. You can look at Ehlers, Pionk, Nemesnikov, Appleton. Which one am I missing?
IFL?
Yeah, IFL. Pardon me. Yeah, absolutely. You can go through those 5 particular players and say at least one of those is not going to be back next year. In terms of probably the one that people are most focused on right now in Nikolai Ehlers, he sort of said that, he said that he would absolutely love to lift a cup with Nikolai Ehlers, that share that championship, that he's watched him grow up, that, he almost feels like a parent because it's been 10 full NHL seasons, 11 seasons since he was drafted. There's a lot there, a lot of history there. He's very proud of what Ehlers has accomplished to date and is still accomplishing in his career. He also said the business side is the business side, and we'll see what happens there. That story is still being written. I continue to think it's less likely it's less likely for him to be back Ehlers next season. That doesn't mean that that's absolutely what happens. That's just the sense that I have at this moment. I wonder, let's just put this out there. Kevin Cheveldayoff did not suggest this. This is my idea based on vibes, let's say. What about a sign and trade when the season is said and done, where Ehlers signs something long-term that helps Winnipeg get better value for the asset on the way out? Men's fences, not that fences need mending, but it maintains relationships, does the Jets a solid, gets Ehlers to a place that he ideally wants to go. I'm not saying that that's a likelihood exactly, but I just can't help but think that there are contingencies beyond what we see right this second.
And just quickly on Pionk, I've got a lot of time with what Pionk has done. He seems to fit in very, very well within the culture of the team. He's playing big minutes. He's had a big bounce back year from last year. But along with having a bounce back year and putting up a bunch of points, the price goes up. And I'll be honest, I have seen, your estimates and some other estimates. And as much as I am a fan of Neil Pionk and I like him, I'm not one of his big critics. Excuse me. There was some serious sticker shock when I saw what that price of a potential. A guy that has been playing top 4 minutes, right shot defenseman. You know what a premium those guys are. And keeping Neil Pionk could be a real challenge as well.
Yeah, 100%. He's earned that, though. It's interesting. There's chaos to his defensive game, so you don't always feel safe that he's like part of your shutdown unit in the top 4. At the same time, he plays an enormous role for the Jets. His minutes are high. I think it's over 21 minutes a game right now. Do I have that right, or am I thinking of a different player? But his minutes are high. His point production is high, and he plays on that right side. So I think that he'll command a bigger price than fans are necessarily comfortable with. Does it get all the way as high as the projections say so? I'm not that sure. I think that there are other factors at play as well. Pionk sees Winnipeg as home. It's close to where he grew up. He's raising a family, all these sorts of things as well, right? Like there are considerations outside of the maximum literal dollar figure. But even then, I know that there are fans who would be concerned if he re-upped it the $6 million range that he's already in. And believe you me, like whatever your concerns are, he's getting a raise from that. Could it be, because Cheveldayoff has been particular in the past, that there are certain players that he likes at certain price points but will let go? And we've seen it with Myers. We saw it with Sherratt, right? Like he liked those players. But at certain prices, sometimes guys earn the right to play elsewhere. And it may be that Cheveldayoff is unable to retain Pionk and has to come up with some different solutions.
Murat, this was phenomenal. Thank you so much for this. This was, I think, we were all really, really interested to hear from Kevin Cheveldayoff, and considering the way that this was done with the Athletic and with the Winnipeg Free Press on the road, could not have had a better guy to come in and give us the lowdown on the sit down with the general managers. We go into this one tonight. Enjoy the game. We'll look forward to your coverage from Denver. Have a safe trip back, and we'll see you at the rink. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks, Sas. Thanks very, very much.
Oh, that was great. Murat Atesh, subscribe today if you haven't already. Theathletic.com. It is all there right now for you. A very, very long read. Murat, really got into it. Jets trade deadline plans. Interest in Jonathan Toews. 5 takeaways from general manager Kevin Cheveldayoff from Denver from his midseason address yesterday.